Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Frank Davis, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 22 years old, though I felt 100 years older. Before the war, my world was simple. It smelled of hot oil, shaved steel, and the cheap coffee we drank on our breaks. I was a factory worker in Cleveland, Ohio. My life had a rhythm, a steady, deafening beat set by the stamping presses and the whine of the assembly line. Clank-whirr-hiss, clank-whirr-hiss. It was a language I understood. Everything had a place. Every gear meshed with another. Every problem had a blueprint, a solution you could find in a manual or by talking to the foreman. You put in the parts, you tighten the bolts, and a finished product rolled off the line. Order, logic, that was the world I knew. I believed any problem, any machine could be fixed if you just understood how it worked. The war taught me otherwise. People think the sound of war is the explosions, the screams. But for a radio man, for me, the most terrifying sound in the world is no sound at all. Let me tell you about a silence so cold it could freeze your soul in a little patch of godforsaken forest they called the Colmar Pocket. The cold came for you first. It wasn't like a Cleveland winter with its honest, straightforward bite. This was a French winter in the Vosges mountains, a miserable, wet cold that seeped through your boots, your coat, your skin, and settled deep in your bones. It was a living thing, and it wanted you dead. The snow wasn't white. It was a churned-up mess of gray slush, black mud, and dark, ugly stains we tried not to look at too closely. The trees were skeletal, their branches splintered and torn by artillery, looking like giant, broken fingers clawing at a perpetually overcast sky. The air smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and cordite, a perfume from hell. My world was a hole scraped into the frozen ground, just big enough for me, my carbine, and my mistress, the SCR 300 backpack radio. She weighed 35 pounds, but felt like 100. I knew her every curve, every switch, every quirk. She was my connection to everything that wasn't this miserable hole. She was the voice of command, the promise of artillery, the thin, crackling thread that kept our company from being just another forgotten pocket of men waiting to die. My job wasn't to fight, not really. My job was to listen, to talk, to keep the line open. A simple factory job, you might think. Plug A into B, turn knob C, but out here, the machine was fighting back. The cold was her enemy. It choked the life out of the batteries, made the wires brittle and stiff. I'd sleep with the battery packs tucked into my armpits, trying to give them just a little of my own warmth. My fingers, chapped and raw, were my most important tools. I had to be able to work the dials, strip a wire, tighten a connection in the dark by feel alone. The factory had taught me how a machine feels when it's running right. That smooth hum, the lack of vibration. My radio was the same. I could tell her mood by the quality of the static, a language only I seemed to understand. We'd been dug in for days. Listening to the Germans shouting sometimes, just across the trees, a waiting game. The tension was a low hum, like a machine about to throw a gear. And then the shelling started. It wasn't the sporadic, harassing fire we'd gotten used to. This was different, this was systematic. A rolling barrage that walked its way up the ridge towards us. The ground shook, a deep, gut-wrenching tremor. The noise was immense, a physical force that pressed in on you, stole the air from your lungs. It wasn't the steady rhythm of the factory. It was the sound of chaos, the sound of a world being torn apart, bolt by bolt. Trees that had stood for a century were vaporized in a flash of orange and black. Dirt and ice and splinters rained down on us in our holes. I hunched over my radio, trying to shield it with my body, my helmet pulled down low. Lieutenant Miller was screaming into his field phone, but I was focused on my own world. The static in my ear was my lifeline. I could hear Able Company on the flank taking a beating. Their operator's voice was high, strained, cutting in and out. Then Baker Company, trying to report movement in the trees. The airwaves were a mess of panicked voices and the electric shriek of interference from the explosions. My job was to filter it, to make sense of it, to keep our own channel to battalion clear and ready. A shell hit close. So close the world went white and silent for a second, the overpressure slamming into me like a fist. I was thrown against the frozen wall of my foxhole. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. I tasted blood and dirt. My helmet was gone. I shook my head trying to clear the fog, my hands instinctively going to my radio, and that's when I felt it. The cold, dead silence in my earphones. Nothing, not even static. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My fear, the one I pushed down every single day, was here. The line was dead. We were cut off. Alone. I remember a strange, cold calm washing over me. The factory worker took over. Problem on the line. Diagnose. Isolate. Repair. The shelling was still happening, a constant, earth-shattering roar, but it faded into the background. My universe shrank to the metal box strapped to my back. I shrugged it off, laying it carefully on a spare poncho. The back casing was dented, a jagged tear in the metal where a piece of shrapnel had glanced off. Not a direct hit, a chance. A lucky break in a world that had run out of luck. My fingers were numb, clumsy stumps. I fumbled with the clasps, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, a mess. A few wires were severed, clean as a razor cut. The main transmitter tube was shattered. My thoughts were stripped gears, grinding uselessly. I didn't have a spare tube. No one did. We were stranded. I looked up, saw the strained face of my Lieutenant Miller peering into my hole. He didn't have to say anything. His eyes asked the question for him. Can you fix it, Davis? In Cleveland, I'd have requisitioned a new part. I would have followed the manual. Here, there was no manual. There was only the snow, the noise, and the dead machine. That's when the shooting started. The crack, crack, crack of German MG-42s from the tree line, a sound like a giant tearing a canvas sheet. The deeper thumps of our Garens answering back. They were coming. The shelling had been the prelude. This was the attack. Men were yelling. Medics were screaming. The methodical chaos of the factory was a distant dream. This was pure, unadulterated entropy, and in the middle of it I was on my knees, staring at a broken radio. My cousin died at Anzio. I remembered the letter my aunt sent. He was just gone 1 minute there, 1 second, and gone the next. Wiped away. We couldn't be wiped away. I wouldn't let it happen. My mind raced. I needed a bypass. I needed to bridge the connection. My eyes scanned the wreckage of my foxhole, the debris field of my small world, a length of copper wire from a broken field telephone, a roll of friction tape, a prayer. I pulled out my trench knife, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I started stripping the wire, biting my lip until it bled, forcing my frozen fingers to do the delicate work they were trained for on a factory floor under bright, warm lights. For a moment I could almost smell the hot oil, feel the solid, reassuring weight of a wrench in my hand. Then a bullet whizzed past my head, snapping me back to the freezing mud. It was insane. A man trying to fix a radio with scrap while the world ended around him. I bypassed the shattered tube, rerouting the signal directly. It was a stupid, desperate gamble. It could short the whole system, fry the entire unit beyond any hope of repair, but there were no other options. I wrapped the connections with tape, my movements slow and deliberate, a strange pocket of focus in the middle of the storm. I reconnected the battery, my heart pounding. I put the headphones on, the cold metal stinging my ears. I flipped the switch, nothing, just that dead, soul-crushing silence. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. It was over, we were done. But then I remembered something an old-timer at the plant told me once. Sometimes a machine just needs a good whack, a percussive adjustment, he called it. With a cry of pure frustration, I balled up my fist and slammed it down on the dented casing. And then I heard it, a faint crackle, a whisper of static. Oh God, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was weak, it was fragile, but it was there. The line was open. I scrambled for the handset, screaming into it. Dog 6, this is Ww2 Actual, over. Dog 6, come in, got him it. Nothing but static. I tried again, my voice hoarse. Dog 6, this is Ww2 Actual. We are under heavy attack. Need fire mission, danger close. I repeat, danger close. And then a voice, faint, buried in the noise. Whoa, Actual, send coordinates. Lieutenant Miller was at my shoulder, screaming coordinates into my ear as he looked at his map, the numbers a litany against the chaos. I repeated them, shouting into the handset, praying the fragile connection would hold. Each number was a piece of a puzzle, a part on an assembly line that had to be perfect. One wrong digit and the shells would land on us. I relayed the final grid. The voice on the other end repeated them back. They were correct. We waited for an eternity that was probably only 30 seconds. The German infantry was close now. I could see their gray uniforms moving between the shattered trees. A grenade went off in the next foxhole. Then came a new sound. A sound that started as a whisper and grew into a freight train tearing through the sky right over our heads. Our artillery. The first shells landed in the trees with a series of deafening crump-crump-crump sounds that shook the very atoms of the air. The forest erupted in fire and steel. The German attack faltered, then broke, the survivors melting back into the woods. The shooting died down, replaced by the cries of the wounded and the hiss of falling snow on hot shrapnel. Silence returned, but this was a different silence. It wasn't the dead silence of isolation. It was the silence of survival. I leaned back against the mud wall, my body trembling, and just listened to the beautiful, beautiful static in my ears. Back in the factory in Cleveland, we built things, engines, parts. They all followed a blueprint. If a line went down, you knew why. You had the tools, the parts, the manual. You followed the procedure and you fixed it. The war taught me that the most important connections in this world have no blueprint. Life, courage, hope, they're held together with spit and prayer and a piece of scrap wire you find in the snow. They break for no reason, and you have to fix them with nothing but what's inside of you. I spent the rest of my life working with machines, but I never again believed that everything could be fixed by the book. Some things, some moments, they are broken and rebuilt in ways no manual could ever explain. I learned something vital in that frozen forest. You spend your life thinking you need the right tools for the job, the right parts, the right training. But when it really matters, when everything goes silent and the world is coming apart at the seams, you find out that you are the tool. Your hands, your will, your stubborn refusal to let the line go dead, that's all you've got. And sometimes, against all odds, it's just enough. This memory, it's a signal I've carried for a long time. It can get faint with the years, buried under the static of everyday life. Help me keep the channel open. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.